Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you're here with us today. If you're watching live or if you're watching the recording, I'm so glad that you found this resource. I think this is going to be a really spectacular discussion today. My name is Gabby Conicor. I am mom to 10-year-old Elliot, who was diagnosed and started Deep Connections because I really wanted to be able to connect with other parents whose children were struggling with really very severe effects of a rare epilepsy. So that's what we're here today to talk about, is life with this kind of, these rare epilepsies, but living without a diagnosis. So before we get started, I just want to make sure that everybody knows this webinar is being recorded. It'll be up online in our resource center within about a week. If you are joining us as a participant, you are off camera and muted, so don't worry. You can keep doing what you need to do while you listen. I imagine most of you are multitasking because that's what this life is all about. We have to do that pretty much nonstop. But, this is just the second in a series that we've started now that Ann, who we're so thrilled is working with us to do this series on just kind of open discussions, which are an opportunity for caregivers to come together and be in community and really share on a topic of interest and concern for the community. So really important topic today on discussing life with an undiagnosed disorder. And I'm going to pass it over to Ann to take over and lead us and be your guide today. So thank you, Ann, and thank you everybody for being with us to share your journeys.
Thank you, Gabby. I'm Ann Thompson Heller. I'm a volunteer for DEE-P, and I'm really grateful to be here. I'm also really excited about this topic. It's a topic that's really very close to me personally. I am a mom to a 2-year-old little girl named Jordan. I often say she's undiagnosed diagnosed. So I, for the longest time, thought her diagnosis was a developmental and epileptic encephalopathy. She was diagnosed with infantile spasms, global delays, but not realizing that we didn't know what the etiology was, what the actual diagnosis of the underlying cause was for her. And so that kind of threw us into a whole mission, and a search to try to figure that out. And there are so many reasons, that people seek and really want a diagnosis. The importance of understanding recurrence, for family planning purposes, treatment, medications that work, medications that should be avoided, any type of gene therapy or clinical trials. Without a diagnosis, those are hard to tap into. Prognosis, what do we know about it? What do we know about its course? Will there be improvements? Will there be milestones that will be met? But also, thinking about different people's diagnostic odysseys. I know there's a lot of questions of why. There can be feelings of guilt, feelings of ownership over what's going on for our kids. And so understanding the cause can help with that a lot. It can also help be part of a community. And so when this topic came up as a potential deep discussion, I was really excited about it, just because I think this is something that impacts so many people. And so I am thrilled to have 3 wonderful moms join us tonight who have experienced this in their own way. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then we'll get started on the topic. Jen, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Spina. I'm mom to Nora. Nora is almost 4 years old, and she has an ultra-rare genetic disorder that presented with epilepsy, infantile spasms, as well as global delays. We spent the past 3.5 years searching for answers, but to date, she remains undiagnosed, although we have identified a couple of variants of uncertain significance, or VUSs, if you're familiar with that term. Last year, I started the Finding Nori Foundation, which is a nonprofit whose mission it is to further scientific research on some of the VUSs that we've identified, so that we can ultimately confirm a genetic diagnosis and look at targeted treatment options. And as Ann mentioned, being undiagnosed, I feel like, has been just a really big part of our story. It's kind of rippled through so many aspects of our life, like Ann mentioned, and I'm really happy to be here today to talk about it. I don't know, Mariah, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I wasn't sure if we were just speaking up or if we had assigned. Hi guys, I'm Mariah. I am mom to Emma, who is 6, and Abby, who is 4. Both of my daughters have an ultra rare genetic condition that results in epilepsy. My girls also both had infantile spasms as babies, progressed to Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and they continue to have seizures. Emma daily, Abby weekly. Their condition has resulted in them both being very developmentally disabled. They're both in wheelchairs and use feeding tubes, and have respiratory issues. So kind of all the things for them. And we have lived undiagnosed for a long time. And when we had Abby, by looking at both of our girls' DNA together, we learned that their genetic cause is likely due to a gene called FAP12. So having our second kiddo kind of allowed us to find a genetic diagnosis, which has been interesting. But the genetic diagnosis itself, Emma and Abby are still the only 2 identified people in the world that have their condition. So while we technically do have a genetic diagnosis, we don't know anything about it since it's only my girls that have been found. And honestly, we're still trying to confirm that. So in 2020, I launched the Lightning and Love Foundation, which aims at researching their particular gene. We've done a bunch of studies in animal models and are seeing results that this gene is definitely affects development in the animal models, but we're still working on finding additional humans and publishing research papers. So we're kind of living in this purgatory of, yes, we have a gene, we have a diagnosis, but we are still the only ones. So we still feel pretty undiagnosed. So it's definitely been a journey, but I'm excited to chat more about it with everybody today.
And hi, I'm Kelsey. I am mom to Seda, who just turned 4. Oh, well, I guess it's been a month, but to me, she just turned 4 because I'm still in denial. And we are truly undiagnosed. With our genetic results, we only have 2 variants of unknown significance, but they are on recessive genes. And so since she only has the 1 copy from one is from me and 1 is from dad, it still shouldn't be the cause of anything. So we are, I think the math shakes out to just 1 in 10 million that it just happened. And kind of where we are in that journey is just on the acceptance end, maybe for now. We'll see how long it lasts. But since it's not likely that we'll get any answers, we are joining the Rare Disease Network, but we've been told we probably won't get too many answers. So it's just really about like accepting that experience and working through medical complexity.
Thank you. I'm curious if, you've all started to introduce yourselves and your stories a little bit, but if you talk a little bit more about what your diagnostic journey has been like, how you started off and kind of navigated things, over the course of the journey.
I mean, I can start because I literally just looked at my emails for dates of when I got the results back of our genetic report. So we were diagnosed with infantile spasms. We went in for these seizures. This poor baby resident told us that it was infantile spasms, and we naturally asked a lot of questions that she was just not prepared to answer. And so December 29th, by January 10th, we had the first round of genetic results with the 2 variants. And I remember the genetic counselor, when we were still in our first admission, saying, I want your genes to come back clean, or clear, not clean, that sounds clear, because then there's like a better prognosis for how Seda might develop through the infantile spasms and so on. So we held on to that, and then they came back clear, but we still weren't seeing any progress. None of the interventions for infantile spasms were working. And then we got the second round, which I believe is genome. Is it exome or genome is the next round? So we got those back, still the same variants, nothing else, like no micro deletions or anything like that that they could pick up on at the time. But Seda still wasn't progressing. So that, I still remember that geneticist telling us that, but it didn't really shake out to mean too much for what we should look out for in the future, how Seda should respond to medication. And we got those results on March 3rd, 2021, and then had a hemispherectomy 20 days later. So it was definitely a whirlwind. And I the waiting for the genetic results meant a lot on family planning, because it was, we'll wait till we get these results. We'll wait till we get these results. And then to still not get any answers, and to find out our surprise baby during brain surgery. We just had to deal with that. Just, hope for the best. And the second person after my husband to find out about our child was our genetic counselor. And she just said, congratulations. That's really all she could say. Based on our reports, just congratulations. So that was, that was a whirlwind. That was before it had accepted kind of being undiagnosed. It was just having to go with the flow.
Sounds like it all kind of happened at once.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I don't know if everyone's experienced Invitae, if that's who they have had some interesting conversations with me on the phone. Explain this, what's going on. Those poor genetic counselors, what an experience.
It's so funny, Kelsey, that you say for a while you were hoping so undiagnosed meant good. And I remember being in that same boat, and I think they refer to it as idiopathic, right? Idiopathic infantile spasms is the best, because if they can't find a cause, they have the best outcome, or best chance at a typical developmental outcome. And for a long time, I remember anchoring on okay, well, we found a VUS, but it wasn't confirmed. And then it was kind of more or less proven that it's not the cause. And being okay, well, this is good, because it means that there's no roadmap either way. But then over time, as the delays just continued to persist, I very quickly switched into, okay, now I want an answer. Because
now I want, yes.
there is something underlying, and I want an answer for family planning purposes. I want an answer for so many other reasons. But I do feel like you're in that boat. If you're in the infantile spasms community, you're in that wanting to be undiagnosed boat for a while.
Yes. And for treatment options, it kind of unfolds. But I remember our neurologist saying, if there is a genetic cause, then you probably aren't going to be a surgery candidate. So, I mean, there just was a lot of pressure on those genes coming back without an answer. But then you fast forward, 3 years later, and it's kind of I wish there was something. I wish there was some sort of answer.
Yep. And that's funny. I followed you and stayed up for a while. I did not know she had had a hemispherectomy. Didn't know that was part of her journey. Yeah. So maybe I'll just chime in here with a little bit more detail on our diagnostic journey. So when I had Nora, I brought home what I thought was a perfectly healthy baby. I think like many other families I've talked to. And it was when she was around 3 months old, she started having focal seizures that then turned into infantile spasms at 4 months old. We immediately started to do all the testing, ruled out any structural causes. Her brain is, very typically formed, and started genetic testing. The interesting thing with Nora is we did get a gene variant on her initial epilepsy panel, which is on a gene called ALG13. And to this day, Nora matches the associated disorder extremely well. But the inheritance pattern of the gene virtually makes it so it cannot be the cause. And we have actually been involved with studies with Invitae where they have reclassified the gene from a variant of uncertain significance to likely benign because of studies on the lineage of my family. So that we kind of tabled and put to the side, but not before I spent 2+ years working with a specialist on the ALG13 gene at the Mayo Clinic. She did all sorts of functional studies. She even enrolled Nora in the CDG natural history study for a year because she too thought there's enough suspicion here. But in summary, like summarizing 3 years of work, we've eventually kind of like put it off to the side. But that has been really difficult for me to let go of because I anchored on that diagnosis and I'm involved in that community. And now like having to accept that, oh, this isn't the cause, this is not her diagnosis, has been very difficult for me to navigate. But since then, in parallel with working with Mayo, she had her whole exome sequenced, and now she has gone on to have her whole genome sequenced through the Rare Genomes Project and the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. They did identify one additional variant on a gene called PAX5 that has very little known to date, but it's just starting to be linked with neurodevelopmental disorders. And she was actually in a research publication as one of 16 individuals. It is what I call now suspicious, and like various genetic counselors and geneticists have different opinions on how suspicious. It's definitely not a slam dunk. But that is where we're focusing our efforts for the Finding Nori Foundation, is raising funds to further research like the actual functional impact of her variant and other gene variants on PAX5 to try to give us a better indication of if it's the cause of Nora's neurodevelopmental disorder or not. So it's been, I just feel like a very long, convoluted, like there's so many twists and turns where you think you have an answer and then you don't. And I think I've just come to accept that what I once thought would be, oh, we'll just get this one more round of testing. Like right now she's getting her RNA sequenced through the UDN. And for a long time, I was like, okay, I'm going to wait for this one more test and then we're going to have an answer. And now I've kind of come to grips with it's going to be a much longer road than that.
Fascinating how many variations of things there are. Even, I mean, both of you so far have talked about variants of unknown significance. We have one too, that has been basically ruled out and said, that where the mutation is not part of the gene that's associated with a DEE. Yeah. And it doesn't fit, it's kind of mind-boggling how 3 billion letters, that make up the genome, one can be flipped, and trying to find that sometimes is mind-boggling. You both mentioned Invitae, and we went through GeneDx. Is that similar? Like what is Invitae?
Just a genetic testing company.
It is? Okay.
GeneDx is another. GeneDx did Nora's full exome, and Invitae did her epilepsy panel.
Okay.
And sometimes the two companies or the multiple companies will have the genes classified differently, which is actually the case with our VUS too. Okay.
Interesting.
Crazy. So sometimes it can depend on who you get tested through, whether it even returns the VUS or not.
Oh, Lord. Okay. So,
Very
okay. Just like, I'll just put that in the back of my mind for some follow-up later.
Another email that needs to be drafted.
Yeah, another email.
I can go next. And I pull from so much of the things both of you guys said, especially talking about the infantile spasms with the idiopathic. I wonder actually if they even still have that recommendation anymore, that if you're idiopathic, you're better off, because I feel like the more genetics that are coming out of these undiagnosed scenarios, the more we're realizing no matter what, there's going to be some underlying cause there. It's probably just a gene we don't know of yet. But in any case, I brought home a baby that I also thought was perfectly healthy. At 6 weeks old, she also started having focal seizures and infantile spasms. I didn't realize it at the time. I have this video that is of my cute little baby, and I'm like tickling her. And as I looked back later on, I'm like watching her have infantile spasms that I had no idea. I thought she was just moving in a weird way that babies move. So it's like heartbreaking to look back and be like, I had no idea my child was seizing, as I was, thinking that she was just being cute. In any case, we were really alerted to it when she had the focal seizures. So she just stopped breathing, which was terrifying. Took her in, same thing. A doctor walked in. I felt so bad for her to have to tell us your kiddo's having infantile spasms and kind of what that looked like for us. We did the epilepsy panel first. It came back clear. Then we did whole exome sequencing. That also came back clear. At that point, the genetic counselor told us this is likely random. It probably just happened in Emma. It's probably just a mutation that happened in birth. And so in so many words, she said, it's not likely that this will happen again. So we went on to have a second kiddo. And when our second kiddo started having seizures as well, that's kind of when it switched for me, that I no longer wanted it to be idiopathic. I wanted a diagnosis, because now 2 of my kids were having the exact same symptoms. So there was definitely something there. And in true mom guilt form, I made that happen. I decided to have that second kiddo. So I think the undiagnosed world is very difficult for family planning, which a couple you guys have mentioned as well. And so for us, it was kind of bittersweet. Obviously, I did not want to bring another kiddo into the world that had that condition, but because we were able to have both of the girls' DNA compared when we actually ran whole genome sequencing, which we ran through the Rare Genomes Project, and because our family became interesting, insurance decided to cover it. So we had 2 individual whole genome sequences run by 2 different companies. And by looking at both the girls' DNA, they were able to find a gene, FAP12. It's a recessive inheritance pattern. So I have 1 broken copy. My husband has 1 broken copy. We unfortunately passed both of our broken copies on to both of our children. So there's actually only a 25% chance that you would pass that on to 1 kiddo. 75% chance we would have had a healthy child, and we passed it on twice. So we just kind of won the bad luck lottery with that. But it did give us a diagnosis. It helped with our second daughter's treatment plan. We learned so much about how our first daughter responded to medications that we could kind of fine tune the treatment for our second daughter. And while she's still extremely developmentally delayed, she is having a better outcome so far than our first daughter. And I think that's a huge point to being undiagnosed as well, is just that struggle with how do you treat, not knowing if you don't have anybody else to compare it to and what's worked for them. And it also gave us the ability to start a research foundation. So we're doing a lot of research into understanding this gene, so that it can be published hopefully within Invitae and GeneDx, so that other people could potentially find it if that's what their genetic cause is. At this point, nobody even knows to look for it. So people may be out there living with FAP12 disease and they have no idea because none of the tests flag for it. So that's kind of where we are at with our future research prospects. But I do know that acceptance has been a huge piece for me as well. We started off launching the research foundation really as a way of coping with it. I just needed somehow to fix our situation. And that was how I did it. I think the farther along in the journey I've gotten, and kind of Jen, you mentioned this as well, it's been a roller coaster. You know, you think you're making progress and then you get news that's not great. Research just takes forever. So we've been battling for 3.5 years now. And while we're making progress, it's just really, really slow. And so I've also learned that in parallel to my coping strategy of wanting to find answers and figure out a solution, it's still having to live undiagnosed and just find acceptance in that space, because it's hard to make a lot of progress. And it's just something you have to kind of learn to live with. I think our community of undiagnosed can be a little hard, but I think that's why we're all here together to kind of talk and commiserate about it. But I think finding acceptance in that space has been helpful for me as well along our journey. So.
Absolutely. You know, even as you talk about acceptance, I think about the different things that, you know, kind of help navigate the undiagnosed world and cope with the undiagnosed world. And sometimes like the acceptance, you know, I really identify with, also trying to leave no stone unturned. And I think that can look different for everybody. But I know things like the UDN, the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, you know, Rare Genomes, those have been really helpful. with that in mind, I'm thinking about how I found out from the UDN, and possibly Rare Genomes from Jen. Those were not things that were presented, in any of our medical appointments. We did the genetic testing, the epilepsy panel, the rare genomes or exome. I also always get those confused, which one's which. But that was it, and so I'm curious, even through your experiences and your journeys, are there things that you wish you had known, early on, or that, you would want to share with somebody else?
I was astounded that, like, when we got our whole exome done, our home genetic counselor, who was a good genetic counselor, this isn't necessarily, disparaging to her. I think it's just something that's not necessarily taught. She said, your exome's clear. Come back we can repeat it once for free. Let's target doing that in a year or two and see if anything comes up. And that was it. And it was like, you've reached the end of the road. Just, there's nothing more we can tell you. And it was through other parents, like the Facebook groups, that I even heard about rare genomes. And that's kind of one of the things I would love to influence into the genetic counseling curriculum, which is just, here are a set of resources when you have these rare, inconclusive, undiagnosed families. And I understand, right, when you get the diagnosis of infantile spasms and you don't have answers, you're so overwhelmed that wanting to apply to a bunch of research studies might not be top of your list. But eventually it did become top of my list, and it would have been nice to know where to go, because I think sometimes we just serendipitously hear these things from another parent, and if you don't, you would never know about it.
Yeah, they told us insurance won't cover whole genome sequencing, and that was it. There was no, but these are free resources where you could, or research studies that you could go seek out. They made it seem like that was the end of the road for our genetic testing, until I just got on Google and started searching. But yeah, there wasn't any set suggestions of, we can't do anything else, but you can go to these resources.
Definitely social media, which I wish I could just take a break from, but I am terrified to take a break because it is where you're learning the most information. It has been really frustrating to have our team say things kind of in passing, just like I just know, I've heard it before where, oh, you could do this through the foundation. And I just go outside and I'm like, foundation, foundation, where are you? Because they didn't even clarify what foundation, how do I contact them? Where are they located? What's involved? And it isn't until something on social media or some support group says, I did this, these were the steps, and then here's what you can do too, that we've actually found different types of supports or therapies to try that then we take back to our home hospital, and they're like, oh yeah, we can do that, or we offer that, or that's, yeah. It's been very frustrating. I think just being undiagnosed is frustrating for so many reasons. But for us, I think one of the biggest things is kind of frustration with the professionals that are supposed to have the answers, kind of losing that faith that I think we all might have with you go to the doctor and you get an answer. So then when you've gone to multiple doctors and don't get an answer, it hurts.
Yeah, there's definitely that transition, I think, for our community between the doctors know the answers and they fix things, to the doctors have no clue and it's on us to figure it out, even just down to the medical care for our children. I take my girls in and they stump the doctors half the time, and I have to say, this is kind of what they do and this is how it presents or whatever. And it can be a little frustrating. There's definitely I don't want to say lack of confidence, because I trust our team, but just accepting that they don't have all the answers, I guess.
Yeah, a disillusionment.
Yeah.
That you can, go to a really small, even the specialists who know infantile spasms, or even know, I know in your case, Mariah, maybe there's no doctor that knows your specific gene, but specific genes really well. And they reach a point where you've exhausted all of their knowledge.
Did either of you ever do second opinions?
We did for surgical consults.
Okay. Because I think we just on that, wish of well, maybe another doctor will have the magic answer. And I feel like that was part of our journey too, was just seeking out, okay, well, maybe they know, and just trying to find somebody has to know. And they didn't.
Yeah.
Do your neurologists say the same thing of like, if you ask 5 neurologists their opinion, you'll get 7? Have you guys heard that? We get that joke every single time. And it's like, that's not helpful.
We're funny.
I remember that as well. Our neurologist had told me, I've never had a mom ask for so many EEGs, because that was the same thing. The seizures and the EEG to me were directly linked to development. And so versus understanding that there was this underlying genetic cause that I couldn't fix, I thought if we can just keep the EEG clean with medications, we'll be fine. And I think that's also part of that acceptance piece of learning that, okay, there's something going on that's bigger than just having a seizure, and that's going to affect all areas of the child versus just treating this one piece.
Yeah, and that's, I think my daughter has a unique story in, given the extent of her delays. We actually, so we tried several anti-epileptic drugs, they all failed, but she has had seizure control on the ketogenic diet since she was 8 months old. And to me, that was all right, we've got it under control, and like her development's going to pick up and she's going to be one of those idiopathic cases. And the delays just persisted to the point where it's like, okay, well, we know that whatever it is, it's like some critical protein for appropriate neural development just isn't happening in her body.
I think with like these developmental epileptic encephalopathies, right? A lot of people, at least I was one of them, tend to think that the seizures, the epilepsy is the problem, whereas really the epilepsy and seizures are just a symptom of the problem, just like one piece of your whole picture. And that took me a long time to get past.
Yeah,
That was a big thing for me to get past too. And every time in the beginning, Jordan would have a seizure, I would feel frantic because I didn't want it to further impact her development, not really understanding that even if we were able to get seizure control, her development would still be delayed and should still have disabilities. And I know it can take a really long time. I want to acknowledge, a great comment that one of the participants made. Thank you, Megan. She was sharing that, her daughter went undiagnosed for 12 years. And they just found a diagnosis, which is wonderful. Congratulations. And I think it's also just that reminder that there are new discoveries and new research and new things happening all the time. But it was something that you said, Kelsey, also made me think of, we kind of live in a system where if we don't ask, it's just not necessarily offered, and so it does put a lot of that emotional burden, the mental and emotional burden, on the parents and caregivers, to kind of reach back out, to follow up, to drive the bus. So if there is that provider that, you kind of feel like they've got the wheel a little bit, it's the best feeling in the world. Yeah. How, you've talked a little bit about this, but like with all the effort, all the work that goes in, what's been the most helpful in navigating it all and finding that place of acceptance that you talked about, Mariah, or other, helping you to get where you are now?
For me, I think it's just been time, which is a really not helpful answer, because when you're in the heat of it in the early stages, you just want your answers now. And I remember having that urgency of, I need to fix this, I need to do all these things. And I think that's why I started the foundation and pushed so hard for research, because I felt that urgency. And it's only been time that's really allowed me to reach that place of acceptance, where I've kind of learned that my kiddos are who my kiddos are. And while I think it's really good to have a parallel of hope and wanting to push progress and wanting to drive research, there's also that parallel side of just enjoying your children as they are and kind of living the life that you've been given with as much joy as you can muster with a really difficult situation. And so I think I had to go through all of the hard pieces to get to that place of acceptance. I had to try to find a diagnosis. I had to find a diagnosis and then try to find more people. And I had to try to publish research. I had to try to do all these things and realize that as great as it would be to have those answers, it's not necessarily going to change our world significantly. So I might as well just enjoy our world as we have it in the meantime. And then another one that's not always super helpful, finding a support system. I have a really great network of fellow moms, both online through communities like this and locally to me, that are people I can vent to about our unique situations. So I think this is a really great forum and place to be able to connect. I'm always happy if anybody needs to chat to reach out to me, but I think just being able to reach out to other people that are going through similar situations, because in our personal lives, I don't always have those connections in my, pre-children friends. And so it's been really helpful for me to find people who understand our worlds and can talk the talk with me a little bit.
And Mariah, I'm glad you mentioned that about just enjoying the child you have, because I feel like people might be listening today, or you feel like there's so much on you already as a rare disease parent, like so much pressure on you. And like, well, my child's undiagnosed. I need to start a foundation. I need to do all of these things. And you don't. I will say, for me personally, being told your child has a rare disorder and there's nothing we can do, oh, and we can't even tell you what it is, was like, it was the epitome of a powerless feeling. And so for me, starting this foundation, like, to me, it felt like a way to take a little bit of my power back. And it was something I was doing for me as kind of a way to instill a little bit of control in a situation where I had no control. But other people do that by saying, there's so many ways to take back your control. I'm not going to let the search for answers rule my life, whatever it may be, whatever path you choose in terms of that, like, take your power back in whatever way feels authentic to you. Like, you do not need to do all of the things. And actually, I'm like, in my secret heart of hearts, I would love nothing more than for Nora's eventual answer to be, you know what? She just has a really rare variant on an already known disorder that has this big established community. Because when I went to the CDG conference, as an example, like, huge support system, like, you have so many people involved that they're able to move the ball forward so much faster than you can. So that's kind of still my secret hope, is that we get an answer and the answer is, wow, this is a community that already exists that you can plug yourself into. But I guess I just want to reiterate the point, like, you don't have to do all the things if all the things feel horrifically overwhelming to you. Do what works for you.
And I 100% agree with that, because I did all the things early on because that was my way of, like you said, kind of taking back some control and having some sort of power over the situation, especially leaving a doctor's office where, again, they said there's nothing we can do. And you're like, want to bet? And then try to do it yourself. And so I respect the people that go this route. And there's so many amazing parents out there that are driving research and driving foundations. But I also really, really respect those that don't do this and find other ways and find acceptance even earlier than I did, in whatever way that is, because I think that I wish I had found that acceptance even earlier on, and not done my foundation, but been able to do that in parallel to being a little bit more accepting of our life versus trying to just find the answers, which is what I've been doing for so long and finally got to this place. So I think, there's a bunch of different coping mechanisms, and I think mine was what worked for me, and I'm proud of it, but I'm also very I respect the people that don't have to do all this to get to that place.
I don't know if Kelsey is frozen there.
I think she is.
I
think so.
Oh.
I think we're having some connectivity issues.
Can you hear us okay, Kelsey?
She froze again.
Okay. Maybe she'll come back in just a second. While we're waiting for her to come back, just in the spirit of sharing resources, Jen, what is the CDG conference?
Oh, so the original variant that I talked about, the ALG13, it's a form of an umbrella of disorders called congenital disorder of glycosylation. And that's there's like a big, forum that they hold every year where there's a ton of CDG experts and there's a nonprofit there. But it was a perfect example of like a very well-established patient and, partner advocacy community that my eyes were like very much open to, wow, this is what it would feel like to have a huge support community. It would be amazing.
Well, and
that
I think
might have been one of the reasons I had a hard time letting go of the diagnosis.
I could understand that. I think some of them, the one I see the most is, and in part because I work with DEE-P and Gabby's really connected to the SCNA Alliance. She's the founder of that. But I see a lot of that, and I see their conferences that are international, and just this what seems like a huge community. And I think that can be one of the things that can feel lacking or missing when you don't have a diagnosis. So. Oh, she's back. Welcome back.
I'm out of the basement, so you're probably going to hear the kids.
That's fine. We missed what you were saying, though. I know it looked like you were sharing a bit about maybe how you were coping or how you navigated, or.
I got to hear a little bit of like Mariah and Jennifer's experience with starting foundations, and I'm on the other end of just, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. I think like I'm trying to process kind of how we got to the part of just accepting not having an answer. And I think maybe the silver linings, the pandemic, like we just had other things to freak out about. I don't know if that's, kind of just sped up how we got here. I think a big part definitely was her hemispherectomy. Like once you don't get a genetic answer, you fail all these medications, kind of like your last resort of like, this might cure or this might give us an answer is surgery. We did surgery and we still developed LGS. And so it kind of, I think it might have just pushed us over the cliff of like, well, we ended up here and we did all the things that we could. So now it's just about finding our joy and living life, because at this point we have done all the things, we've said all the prayers, sent all the coins into a fountain, and we're still here. And yeah, I think that's how we got here. Just like we did enough, we did a lot. Hemispherectomies are rare. So once we're there was not much else we could do in terms of like the big things. And for our infantile spasm friends, we know that it goes from like the ultimate emergency to this is just your day now. So we had nothing, and us as people, I think like our coping skill might have just been, we need to find our happiness. We need that. We cannot, I don't want to say wallow, because I do think you should feel your feelings for as long as you feel them, but we just could not stay so stuck after all the efforts that we did make. So we just picked up our bags and moved on as best we could.
I'm really curious to hear Mariah and Kelsey, and honestly, and Ann's perspective on this too, because I feel like honestly, one of the things that tends to drive this like furious search for answers is wanting to have more kids, because with things so rare, there's no gene therapy, right? Even if you get an answer, maybe you'll find a better like targeted like anti-epileptic drug, or you'll know the keto diet might have better odds, but it's not a cure. So I think for a lot of people initially it's, I want more children. I need to know, like, is this inherited? Is it not? Like, what are my odds of this being repeatable? What are my options? And I think sometimes once we've made our peace with that, it leads to acceptance of being undiagnosed. And this might be just me projecting, because those are my own personal feelings, but I'm interested to hear everybody else's.
So for us, I only started searching for answers after I had my second kiddo. So I knew that we had passed it on, and I knew that we could not have more children naturally. And so I think that for me, it was still kind of on par with that. Like, because I had to, I wanted to know, like, I have both of these kids. I have the ability to find answers because I have like a perfect case study for this gene. And so in that sense, that's kind of why. And then I think I'm also just very type A. I'm an engineer by trade. So my brain is just like, must know answers. Everything is black and white. You know, if this is causing something, I need to understand it. So I think that's kind of where it came from for me.
I mean, as I've already shared, I mean, our second was just here she is. And we got the same kind of like, this is so rare, it's not very likely to be passed on. We put a lot of eggs in that basket and just waited to see. So I guess we were kind of like forced in that position, but we were still in that phase of like trusting the experts, I think. And so being told that this was super rare, the variant is, you know, we got all the variants that were recessive and unknown significance, that we would be fine. And so that might have been the last time we like really trusted the experts, but we were given
Kelsey,
that.
Were you worried about having your second kiddo? Like, were you worried it would be the same genetic condition?
No.
Just like
And
when I had my second, I wasn't either. I was like, there's no way this is ultra rare. Like, it's never going to happen again. I really had zero concern it was going to, and then it did.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, like, I think I have more concern if we like gamble again. You know, we haven't said that we are done, but it is just like, okay, 50-50 chance. And so we've already had that one time. So I probably honestly would be more nervous to try for a third. But
yeah, like had we had a typical second child, we would have just assumed that it was random in Emma. We probably would have never found a diagnosis, especially not with that recessive inheritance pattern. And so we would, if we wanted to have a third, we probably would have felt very safe to do that, not knowing that it still was an inherited disease.
Right.
Yeah.
This has been a really big, and, you know, I know I've talked with Jen about this, you know, a bit as well. Jordan is our first, you know, and we always envisioned ourselves having at least 2, maybe 3 kids. And so for me, it's sort of been this roller coaster. You know, I had a whole plan, you know, especially factoring in my age, factoring in like when I was going to have all the kids. And, you know, when Jordan was diagnosed, I said, nope, absolutely can't do this again. But it was also kind of a roller coaster of processing like the reasons why I didn't feel comfortable. You know, could I manage it? Could I handle it? Not only, you know, the emotional parts, the physical parts, that part over time for me has kind of subsided. And I feel like, you know, I can take care of Jordan and another child. You know, then it was, well, can I get Jordan to all of her appointments and get her all the care that she needs and take care of another child? Would I feel guilty? Like I'm not giving Jordan everything that she needs. There was this whole kind of progression of, you know, could that even be possible? And that was even before the real consideration of would another child have, you know, a similar experience, a similar unknown genetic disorder. And I think I have asked every single genetic counselor, hoping for a different answer, you know, what the odds are. And everyone, you know, says it's between 0 and 25% because we just don't know. And so it is a crapshoot. You know, I think being just over 2 years in, you know, Jordan is not seizure free. You know, she has, you know, intellectual and physical disabilities and visual impairments. And, but I feel like we are in a place where the dust has settled a bit, you know, and things feel more manageable, which I'm really, really grateful for. And so I think, you know, we're at that place where if it happens, you know, it happens. Because that was always what we wanted. We always wanted a lot of kids. It's scary though. It's, you know, I think this experience for me has taught me more about letting go, and kind of just see, you know, than ever before, which, you know, some people listening may be like, well, that's just irresponsible. I don't know. But for me, it's not. Like, for me, it's just enjoying the ride. And, you know, multiple kids have always been part of what we wanted. So we'll see what happens. But it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy decision. You know, what about you, Jen?
I mean, for me, that choice has been, and well, I acknowledged earlier that the knowledge to get to the diagnosis has been, driven in very large part because I have wanted another child for a long time. At the same time, though, I have an older son who is typically developing, and part of me in like lately has been like, okay, well, in the same way I've had to accept that we might not get an answer, I think I'm having to accept that maybe my two kids are, maybe that's just going to be it for me, because I think you need to play out both scenarios, and just nobody can answer this for you. And that's been the frustrating thing, because I've asked, all the geneticists what are the odds, but nobody can look into like your heart and say like, could you handle this? Could you handle a life with just having the children you have? Or could you handle this happening again? Or do you want to pursue another route? And I've been pretty open on anybody who follows Nora's Instagram that right when we started this diagnostic odyssey, we actually were fortunate enough to have health insurance that covered IVF. So we did a round of IVF just for family planning purposes, so that in hopes that one day we would get an answer, we would already have embryos. So age definitely factors in. But I think over time, I mean, it depends on the day you ask me, right, where my head is at. But over time, I might be getting to a place of acceptance of maybe I'm just going to focus on the kids in front of me, right, the life I have in front of me. But it's definitely been like one of the biggest struggles with being undiagnosed for me is that aspect of it.
I think one of the themes kind of throughout this entire panel has been, figuring out what is right for each individual family, each individual kid, and I think that applies so much, to family planning, to the drive to find a diagnosis, to doing all the things or not, and one of the things that was said, early on is especially being in the midst of it, right in the beginning when all the dust gets kicked up. Maybe that's not when, I feel I have the capacity to start applying for these research studies. Maybe that's a few years in, right? There's no one way to do that. And I think that's kind of come up throughout, which, I've really appreciated. I'm mindful of the time. We have about 5 minutes left. I did want to see if there were any questions or anything from participants that they wanted to either share or put in the chat. Let's just see here. Well, one of the things that we are doing next Tuesday, DEE-P is also doing these community chats once a month. And so next Tuesday, we're having a community chat with this conversation, with this topic, so we can continue the conversation. I hope folks can join. I hope, everyone's able to make it, and, it will not be a recorded session. It is a private session, so people can talk more openly and freely if they choose to. So I want to thank you all. You three are just phenomenal and incredible women, and I have learned so much from you on my journey. So I'm grateful, and I appreciate that. And I want to thank everybody who joined today to listen and to be part of the conversation. And I hope to see you all on Tuesday, next Tuesday, for the community chat. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Thanks everyone for sharing. This is really insightful and so powerful to hear from all of you on your journeys and where you've ended up and how you've figured all of this out. And I know that I think all of you found community in Instagram, right? That's how you guys all found each other. So I think that's really a powerful tool also, or social media for families. So maybe, I don't know if you guys want to be contacted. You can we can post your handles somewhere if you guys want, just so people can start following you and be in conversation with you there. But as Ann said, we would love to see more people join us on Tuesday for that chat. And then, find your people, hopefully. So Thank you all for bringing this conversation to the DEEP community. And we'll continue to try to find ways to support you all. So let us know if there's something else that comes up that we can do to help. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.